Hello, good morning. All right, Kirsten, I got your email. And I typed at the top of this email that I'm going to respond on video because I think that maybe that would be easier because you're asking really smart questions and I'm happy to answer them. So, yay for post feasting. FYI, put your leftover stuffing in chili. Who knew? But it makes it a little thicker and it's a good thing to use leftovers. And who loves carrots are great in chili. Anyway, okay, so that's that. I have a name update, a few questions, clarifications about what I agreed to do. Just an FYI, because I haven't read the original email in a while. I was just trying to take notes of everything that was talked about. So not all of it, Kirsten, was, in my assumption, on your plate to follow up on. And some of it I don't even know that you really need to follow up on. It was just discussed. So that's why I tried to make all the notes as clear as possible. Okay, so the Congress conversation about the word or the name of the current nonprofit, whether it is KU or Kinetic Universe, the thing I'm referring to. So first off, in some ways you are correct. It's pretty easy. All you would have to do is agree on a name change. Problem is that the next step of that is all of the different things that have been registered or updated, bank accounts, all of the GuideStar, all the nonprofit stuff with not just with the state for taxes, but for grants and things like that. It is a more complicated process to change a name, but is definitely on the docket with the new current board members to have a conversation about what to call the umbrella nonprofit-esque group. Definitely a conversation. Definitely, they are very aware of the contention and maybe even have opinions about it as well. So I think that makes sense. The names thing that I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get there in a second. The reputational damage, those kind of things, do, based at least on my interviews, are really very local as compared to all the different races that are in different places. But the damage locally seems to be still very much alive, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. Yeah, so that's important. It is the functionality of the names of things could be agreed upon through this Congress thing. Like what is the race called? What do we have some? I'm making all of this up, and all of this has meaning outside of the context of just some outside consultant. But if you wanted to come up with some kind of clever name for a T-shirt, like all of those things could very easily be agreed upon in this conversation. The actual registered name of the nonprofit doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that everybody uses. That's always an option. And it's always an option, too, that kind of like slur words, they can be reclaimed in a positive way. That's also an option. Okay, so if you're still listening and you haven't thrown out the computer, because I know specifically in this group, the words mean something really bad, but that information and the new board members are aware, and I know that it is going to be brought up as a topic whenever the congressional conversation kind of happens. Okay, question number 2. Does contact mean owner? Okay, so in theory, yes. Y'all have made very clear what Justin wants to own and what Justin is interested in being involved in, right? So I have also given that information to everybody collectively, at least Justin and I, although Allie and Kirsten, you have been brought in as support for Justin, which is totally cool. All the conversations we have ever had is about what he would own, whether that would go to his family trust or the HKA nonprofit that is kind of the umbrella of which he is under or his family is under. That the owner would be the thing that he is under as an individual. At least my understanding of the last conversation is that he doesn't want to own it as just an individual person because he would have to be the person who then files taxes and paperwork and that kind of stuff. But if there's an umbrella organization that can do it, then it's more protected as far as like legal IRS nerdy stuff goes. So then there was a conversation about what is that umbrella group. That umbrella group could be something that, and this gets to other questions too, that y'all think have been formed but hasn't been formed, or was formed but wasn't renewed or followed up with. So Kirsten, I think you were following up specifically, and this gets to questions below. With Humboldt Kinetic Association, there is no record of it currently in existence since 2002, but you had said like, no, I did do stuff. Like, okay, great. Well, find that out and find out where the discrepancy is. And if I can help in some way, I'm happy to help with that. So HKA, Humboldt Kinetic Association, could easily be the umbrella group that is y'all, meaning Kirsten, this Justin and Justin's son, right? So that would be the umbrella group that would own the chicken, let's say, and then Justin's name would be the contact. There's also been conversation about if the nonprofit that already exists is the umbrella group, that Justin could still be the contact or the legal things around contact and owner is also very different than what would function in reality. So anyway, y'all get to do whatever you want to do. I don't care. For Q2 in this email, the owner and contact is dependent on what the nonprofit is and the status of the nonprofit. And then it will eventually need a human being to be contacted for the renewals. It is possible that all of that is the Flaming Peacocks, the contact is Justin, and the address is either one of y'all or whatever the nonprofit is that is going to be doing the renewal paperwork. It is a possibility that it still goes to y'all, but part of the licensing agreement is that the nerds fill out the renewal paperwork. Kirsten, you also said that maybe you get a reminder and then you do it. Those all still to be determined. We talked specifically about it's not actually called a trademark for the chicken. It would be called a service mark. Renewing that under kind of the guise that was currently already happening where Justin was the contact just needs... It didn't get renewed in 2017. It didn't get renewed. So that's why it's currently not an active service mark. As far as the rules and things like that, the conversations kind of went all over the place because there was an understanding at some point that Allie may have copyrighted rules, and that seems to not have been the case, but at least was like the mythology, right? Which is what led to new rules being created so that there was no crossover. But now it's a whole new day, so we can figure out whatever you want to do. Then there was a conversation about the title of the race. There was a conversation about which rules to use, what are the awards called, those kind of pieces. And the function of those could totally be and are what I would call piñata topics for the Congress to talk about. And then the legal nerd side of things, we also talked about whether or not these things would potentially even be up to Creative Commons so that they are trademarked and led directly to the umbrella organization that supports the Brown family. Let's say Creative Commons means that anybody would get the opportunity to use them without breaking the law, and that they are registered and shared by this particular entity. What is that entity is still to be determined. So that conversation was also had. Because of the rules specifically being part of the conversation, oh my gosh, this video is already at 8 minutes. I'm so sorry. But because the rules were specifically talked about, the rules that Hobart published in Hobart's book, which is where we get to John Wilson publishing the book. I'm not a lawyer, but it is my understanding that the way that publishings work is the author owns the copyright of a book, even if you didn't actually apply for a copyright for the specific book. So that means Hobart Brown owns those things. Hobart Brown has passed away. So Hobart Brown's estate, I would imagine, would then own it, which I'm guessing is then Justin then owns it. So then Justin would have the ability to determine what to do with those rules, whether they would go into Creative Commons and shared with everybody and nobody really owns them except for this kind of living trust of the Hobart Brown family. Humboldt Kinetic Association is revived as the entity that protects the Hobart Brown family. All of these things are options and to be determined, and just didn't know, right? So I think Bob was on the call at that time, and he volunteered to kind of look into contacting John Wilson and finding out who owns the copyright of the content of that book. Bob Vanderwall is related. is the husband of Dawn, who wrote the most recent book, the Contendium. I always say that word wrong. So that's kind of where that stated or kind of landed. But right now the rules are not the current rules, which were the newish rules or whatever, aren't owned by anybody. And the old rules were published in a book that is owned by someone who's passed away. I'm assuming, therefore, the estate would own them. So while the races are being thought of or planned for 2022, etc., all of these conversations could be easily had by, like, let's say, a race coordinator, course coordinator, subcommittee, bucket number 2 kind of people about how are things going to be actually done. There's plenty of time, obviously, because of COVID. We're probably not going to be having a race in the next 5.5 months. So there's time to work all those things out and get things nailed away so that the proper people are protected and things are above board, I guess, instead of being contentious, is my truce understanding. Okay, question number 4. Are members of the Kinetic Universe and the earlier Kinebar still involved, or did they all leave? I just don't know, and I'm curious to know if we're starting from scratch or not. So it seems pretty much about every 10 years, Kinetics kind of starts from scratch. So I would definitely say that this is the phoenix rising from the ashes. So the current board members are very aware that they are transition board members or interim board members as the organization itself shifts and changes into what is the future of the nonprofit or the organization. How can it best support all the different factions, again, under the guise of this truce? So let's say, for example, if Kinetic Universe is the name of the nonprofit, let's say that it wins a grant, and that grant is $200,000, which, by the way, question number 5, the California Data Project, is a way of gathering economic stimulus data that shows kind of what the benefit of supporting this particular race is monetarily, which then leads to larger grant money, or at least being able to be applying for larger grant money. So let's say that it wins a $200,000 grant. So maybe I'm making all of this up, but maybe the Arcata Lab gets indoor plumbing and a bathroom and some of the holes in the walls repaired with some of that money. Let's say that some of that money goes towards, I don't know, racer startup crew or something, so that people can buy rigs or improve rigs that are already in existence. Let's say that some of that grant money goes towards, you asked in question number 6, KME is the Kinetic Museum. I actually don't know what the E stands for. I can't remember. But maybe some of it goes towards the museum or rotating displays that travel around the world. I don't know. But if we're talking about really large sums of money, all of the different factions could very easily benefit from all of the money and efforts, because it takes everyone to kind of do this thing. So that's what the new board is kind of thinking about. The new board members, again, are interim or transition. So currently, Steve McCaney, who is a racer, Trilobike, I believe is the name of his sculpture. Bob Vanderwally is, Steve agreed to be secretary and is all about governance and documenting bylaws and things like that. Bob has agreed to serve as kind of the interim or transition treasurer, and is also working towards what kind of grant opportunities might be available specific to COVID. Has also been working closely with the landlord of the building that the current museum is currently in. Then Jeno is still agreed to be as part of the kind of interim transition board. She kind of knows everybody and everything in history and all of that kind of stuff, but is not interested in being a long-term serving board member. And then Jennifer Thielander has volunteered to serve to create a fundraising or grant-based kind of strategic plan for the next several years, 3 to 5 years, so that the organization itself is not just financially dependent on the race, but could actually have income coming in each month to be able to support all of the different initiatives and all the different factions throughout the year. So that's the current board members. So none of the people who were on the Kinetic Universe board when I first started with the interviews are still actively serving as board members. They all have much more interest in working in very specific roles that might fall more under bucket number 2, as far as kind of management or organizing or volunteers or coordinators. The nerds that are being recruited are have much more like business acumen or organization skills to be able to help create a nonprofit umbrella group that benefits all of the different factions. That's kind of the goal. So hopefully that is helpful. As part of the Congress conversation, I would imagine that the new board is going to invite people from all different factions into those conversations, so that there can be collective consensus or something like that around very contentious topics, but then collectively everybody decides to move forward. Okay, question number 5. What is the California Data Project mentioned in bucket number 2? California Data Project is the thing that quantifies an organization's kind of economic impact so that you can then use that information to apply for grants or funding or stimulus or COVID relief or things like that. What is KME? We already talked about that, the Kinetic Museum. Feel free to ask more questions. Same thing, Justin. Same thing, Allie, if you're still listening. Okay, HKA homeworky tasks. Kirsten is following up about the Humboldt Kinetic Association. The idea here is that you said that you had paid the Franchise Tax Board of California. That's usually sales tax and not filing state or federal taxes. So that's why the FTB is a good place to start and then find out where you are with the state as far as the Humboldt Kinetic Association being a registered nonprofit, and then potentially what needs to be done state level and federal level to renew that nonprofit. Like I said, it seems to have expired in 2002. If you need help with that, I'm happy to do that. I don't know that you need to contact a Chelsea or a Charlie kind of person. I just was throwing that in there because part of the conversation. Like I said, it from what I can find, it seems pretty obvious that the Humboldt Kinetic Association is not currently an active nonprofit. It could be, but it seems to not be. I also couldn't find anything active around a living trust, so I don't know that you need to contact Jamie, but you could to be thorough. But it is also the case that moving forward, the trust or the nonprofit that is specific to the Hobart family could be formed. Like that could still exist. I don't think that it was, but also you don't necessarily want to recreate the efforts. But like I said, I can't find any evidence of that being current. That doesn't mean that I maybe didn't find it. Sounds great. I know specifically the guide star for Humboldt Kinetic Association is dated 2002. Okay, then Justin, your homework assignment is the idea of who are the seers, possibly their contact information. Some of that information exists or has been compiled over the years, but maybe you have other people too. Working up a list of the verbally loaned items to the museum so that can be properly documented. So we talked about creating a kind of loan agreement of what is in the museum space and what isn't. That makes total sense. And then I would assume that the same kind of template would be used for everybody who has something in loan at the museum to be able to document that and what its financial value is. We also talked, Justin, because this isn't on the list, but we also talked about crafting a kind of licensing agreement template that you would be able to use for anybody who's reaching out to you to license the chicken or something. And that's kind of the nerd way of talking about it. And then there's also bucket number 1 way, which is kind of payments towards the glory, like a good karma payment. So that still needs to be kind of worked out. I have drafts based on your notes, but that's something that we're still, I think, working on. I'm happy to help with. You also can do it on your own, whatever. And then the tangible questions of those licensing things, those contracts, who's going to keep the documents, who's going to be in charge of renewing those documents, who's going to handle the paperwork. Again, the nerds that are being put together, like ideally could do that stuff for you, but I totally understand that you have a long history of being fucked over, so why would you trust this group of people? But it could happen. You could also create your own system of being able to do that too. Okay, I think that is all of the things that are in the email. Just under 20 minutes. Sorry. But if you have any other questions or something, just let me know. Happy to help and honored to be in conversation with you.